Welcome to the Education Marketing Leader podcast with Chris Raposo. If you're looking to dive into the latest industry insights, draw inspiration from education success stories, or just want to sharpen your marketing skills, you're in the right place. Here, we bring you a diverse range of voices from experts and leaders in the field, offering you a unique blend of professional development and practical strategies. Whether you want to understand your audience better, stay updated with the latest tech trends in marketing, or expand your professional network, we've got you covered. So while you're driving on your morning commute or winding down after a busy day, let's explore the dynamic world of education marketing together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Education Marketing Leader with Chris Raposo. Today, my guest is joining me from the Rocky Mountain state of Colorado. His name is Blair Lee. He is the Director of Marketing Communications at Colorado State University and Special Assistant to the President for Brand Advancement for the Community College of Aurora. Blair, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Chris. Thank you for reaching out, and I'm excited about the robust conversation I know we'll have today.
So I first met Blair at NCMPR in March in Seattle while he was still the Executive Director, Strategic Communications and Alumni Engagement at Community Colleges of Aurora. And I listened to one of his talks on how to take an institution through a complete brand overhaul while the goal of driving enrollment and increasing impact and retaining students, which is super important right now with the demographic enrollment cliff looming. So I was really, really impressed by that talk. So I invited Blair on the show to talk about the best ways, best practices on how to do a rebrand on a higher ed campus. So Blair, what are some of the key indicators that it's time for a higher ed institution to consider a complete brand overhaul?
Absolutely. And thanks again, Chris, for it. And of course, I'm going to plug NCNPR for those that don't know. That is the National Council for Marketing and Public Relations. I highly encourage all of my higher ed marketing and communication professionals to get involved with that organization. But to your question on indicators of when it is time for a brand overhaul, I think when the question of like soda comes to mind, the first thing that comes to mind for people is Coke. When people think of a phone, they think iPhone. When people think fast food, they think McDonald's, right? Or Chick-fil-A in this day and age, right? But I think, and that'll make sense in a second, I think when it is time for an institution to go through a brand overhaul is when your identity is all over the place, right? So if someone says Community College of Aurora, right? What is the first thing that comes to mind, right? So we want to make sure that brands are always synonymous with everything. And I think Community College of Aurora, that is what, right? We knew that we were the most diverse college in the state of Colorado. We're the youngest college in the state of Colorado, right? But I think we had to make sure that we were standing apart from those other institutions, right? So I think when it comes time, how do you know indicators? It's when your identity is all over the place, right? When someone mentions your institution's name and you might get mixed, oh, that's that institution over there, or that's that school over there, right? Your institution should be known for one thing, right? And I think that when you start, hearing that mixed bag, that is kind of when you know, hey, it is time to take your institution through a complete brand overhaul.
Yeah, because when you just said that Coke or fast food, I thought about no excuses. Just go after it. Just do it. Nike, right? So it was my first initial thought. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense because people always think branding is maybe having a mascot or certain colors.
Yeah, but I think it is really what comes to mind when your institution is set, right? What are people saying about your brand when you are not in the room? You know what I mean? The best marketing, I always tell people, is word of mouth because it's free. You know what I mean? So I think, just to drive that back home, it is time when your brand or your identity, or you're hearing different things in the marketplace about yourself.
Yes. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So when you open up the talk, you said you were hired on at Community College of Aurora, and you've been doing this brand overhaul for several other schools, and you knew exactly what you needed. You knew exactly what you wanted. And the president of the school, President Mordecai Brownlee, he brought you in and he was fully bought into it. How important is it to have leadership on board from the start?
Well, I will tell you, shout out to Dr. Brownlee, right? A good, colleague, friend, mentor, fraternity brother of mine. You know what I mean? I think in doing this work, one of the critical components when you're thinking about doing an institutional brand overhaul is that you must have buy-in from the leadership. And I knew from day one that that is the type of leader that Dr. Brownlee is. You know, he gives his leaders autonomy to kind of do what needs to be done. But I think from the beginning, when I began this work, Dr. Brownlee painted out very, very clearly, right, what it is that he wanted, what it was that he envisioned. And for that, I'm super, super grateful for the opportunity. But I just want to drive home. Trust from leadership is critical. It's super critical. And I say this because I see some of my peers at other colleges and universities throughout the country, right? And they're like, hey, I just want to pick your brain about this, or I've been trying to do this and I can't seem to break through the glass ceiling on how to do that. And I'll ask the question, I'm like, hey, what is your president's thoughts on this? Oh, well, he doesn't really see it as a priority, or I don't really have a seat at the table to, you know what I mean, advocate for my department or my division at the executive level. And I will tell you this, right? If you do not have executive buy-in, taking your institution through a brand overhaul is not going to go far, Chris.
That is very tough, very true, and not just true about brand overall, but overall marketing strategy or anything in business, really. If you're working hard, you're trying to get the needle moving, and you don't have the full buy-in or the full trust, burnout's going to happen, and you're just going to be stagnant. You won't create your best work, and then eventually you'll just walk out the door if you have the opportunity to do so. The other thing you mentioned is that Dr. Brownlee, he gave you clear expectations, and that's the nice thing about it too, right? Clear is kind. You know where you had to go. You know the target. You knew where to aim towards, and you brought your expertise in. You were able to run with it and be successful with it. So I think that's the other thing when it comes to leadership. You really have to have clear communication with your team of what you expect. Otherwise, they may produce something and waste funds and their time if it's not exactly what you're looking for. And then they get discouraged when they bring something to you and they think, man, we knocked out of the park with this one. And leadership's like,
Yeah, I always told my creative team when I was at CCA, if you walked into our creative suite, one of my favorite taglines from a brand out there, which is Mercedes-Benz, is the best or nothing. So if you walked into our creative suite at CCA, I actually had them put on the walls, the best or nothing. And it was a promise not only to our students, but to the larger stakeholders that our institution has impact on, that our creative team, our marketing team, our public relations team, we're going to put out the best possible product, or we're not going to put out nothing at all, right? And that goes from, you know, the little things, from the stroke of the design, from the typography that is chosen, from the music that is in the cinematic commercial we're putting out, right? We're going to put out the best or nothing at all.
I love that you put that on the wall as a reminder for everybody to see, to get ingrained. So every time they walk in, it's just subconscious, right? They're like, I have my product here, I have my video here. It's good enough, but then it's like, no, the best or nothing. So yeah, definitely love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are some of the initial steps an institution should take once they decide to undergo a brand overhaul? Where should they start?
Oftentimes when you work at a university or a college, we look at the individuals in the academy. And when I say the academy, for those listening that are not familiar with higher ed, we're talking about our academics, our instructors, our faculties, right? We look at them as the subject matter experts. However, a big part when you're going to undergo a brand is looking at your creative team as the professionals, right? So I want everyone on the bus, but I need to make sure that everyone is in the right seat on the bus, right? So I had to make some significant adjustments when I was building out my team, right? I built out this creative team from scratch. probably one, for all my higher ed leaders out there that work in the Marcom space, I will put my creative team at the Community College of Aurora against any creative team out there. But I will say this, you have to give your team trust and autonomy, right? They went to school for graphic design, right? They have a BFA or an MFA in creative or graphic design. They are the subject matter experts, right? So I think as a leader, one of the first things you have to do is make sure that your team recognizes that, hey, me as a leader, they have my trust, but I am to paint out the vision and their job is to go execute and give me a great, great product. You know what I mean? So making sure that they view themselves as professionals, as managers of their craft, that is the best thing. I will also tell you this, back to my point of making sure, we want everyone on the bus, but we want the right people in the seats on the bus. I hired some of the best talent out there. So I think back to the creative team that I built when I was at the Community College of Aurora in a full-time capacity. 4 of those hires actually came from the private sector. Higher ed has a very great way of remaining stagnant, of recruiting from this pool of people that have worked in higher ed for 15 or 20 years, right? My videographer came from the news and journalistic background, you know what I mean? Graphic designer comes from PBS, you know what I mean? Private sector. And I'll tell you why that is great, right? Individuals in the private sector have a sense of urgency. In higher ed, we love to move at a turtle's pace, like, well, let's put it in committee and let's get institutional buy-in. Hey, man, we're behind the curve, actually. We don't have time to throw in committee what color we're going to paint the wall. You know what I mean? So I think it is make sure that you've got the best individuals in their field. Don't be afraid to recruit from the private sector, but really to bring that back to my original point, make sure that they understand they are professionals.
Yeah, especially from the news and TV, because they're on deadline all the time, and they're like, okay, don't overthink it. Let's roll with it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Yeah. So you talked about faculty, stakeholders, how do you ensure that all stakeholders, including faculty, staff, students, alumni, are all on board with the rebranding process?
Yeah. So actually, I posted something on Instagram yesterday. I won't plug myself yet, but essentially what I said on Instagram was higher ed leaders, particularly those in the creative space, take everyone on the journey with you. So everyone from your Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Student Affairs, the Academy, Operations, give everyone a seat at the table, because those emotional deposits that you make will pay dividends later on, right? So that is a way that I've always been able to move my projects or institutional initiatives forward, right? Because I'm bringing everyone on the journey with me. We're not going to get to production or rollout, and it's like, hey, I didn't actually have an opportunity to get input on that, because from the beginning, I'm going to have all the necessary stakeholders at the table. Something else I want to add is that the Community College of Aurora is actually one of the youngest institutions in the Colorado Community College system, right? So CCA actually just turned 40 years old last year, or this past May, right? So I say all that to say, it was not uncommon to walk across this campus and find someone who's been at that institution for 32 years, 33 years, 35 years, right? The institution's only been around for 40 years, right? So making sure that you have those key stakeholders at the table that bring institutional knowledge to the table, right? Because those are the individuals that can pull you to the side and it's like, hey, Blair, I just want to let you know you are about to step on a landmine, and you know what I mean? There's some historical knowledge, right? I think it's great having those individuals at the table, because they can give you the history on the why it is that we do some of this work. I'll also tell you, it's also important to make sure that you are including student voices in the conversation, right? So before we did the brand overhaul, if you remember from my presentation, we did over 100 student focus groups, right? What do students think about the brand, right? Because students internally, at the end of the day, are our customer, right? So I think it's a mix, right? We've got to bring everyone on the journey, but making sure that the decisions we're making are going to impact overall the student experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved that you brought up the folks that worked there for 30 to 35 years, even though college is only 40 years old. And they don't even have to be in leadership positions, but with that tenure, they have influence beyond, and they have influence towards the leadership, right? And because they're so established and so deeply rooted, leadership knows how invested they are, and they may ask them about it too. So
absolutely. The Community College of Aurora is a special place. You've got individuals that have actually gone there as students, graduated, and then have come back and worked at the institution that they got their start at. So I hear you long and loud and clear, right? Like there is something about being able to talk with someone who's been at an institution for 35 years, right? Because they can let you know, hey, this is actually why we began doing that work. But there also are some tough conversations that have to happen, Chris, about, of course, I always heard that, well, we've always done it this way. And this is why we've done it this way, right? And me coming in as the new guy, right? They're like, who's the young guy trying to change stuff up, right? So you there's a period, you get a little win, and then you get the wind behind you, and they're like, okay, I think the new young bald guy does know just a little bit something about what he's talking about.
that's right. You got to earn that trust, man, because sometimes you come in and they're like, hey, this is just fine. I love the way it gives me comfort, the old ways of doing things. And, I don't really want to go away with it because we're doing just all right. But sometimes that's why you want to bring somebody in from the outside. And like you mentioned, bring somebody in from the private sector sometimes as well, because they just know things. They're a little bit ahead of the times sometimes when it comes to marketing and what's trending. Now, let's talk storytelling. I love storytelling. Can you discuss the importance of storytelling and rebranding and how you effectively integrate that into your strategy?
You mentioned it, so I'll go there, Chris. Gen Z has a significant mistrust in higher education as we know it. You know what I mean? And research shows that. Research shows that Gen Z has a mistrust. So I say that to say is that they know when it's BS. We live in a digital age with social media, Yelp. People can throw your organization's name in Google and everything comes up that they want to know about your company, right? So authentic storytelling when it comes to brands is great, right? Particularly about how we tell stories from a cinematic lens of, hey, going to college, earning this credential, changed my life, and it produced social and economic mobility for my family, right? How do we tell them compelling stories that really pull out the heartstrings that help prospective students say, hey, I can envision myself as a student. You know what I mean? Compelling stories that you can tell the emotion, that there's a cinematic experience in it. And you can do that in the artwork that is chosen, in the editorials that's written. But I just say getting authentic with the storytelling is a must for higher ed leaders now, because gone are the times of using the stock photos and thinking that the fake imagery is going to recruit students. Students today are savvy and they know how to do their research.
Absolutely. Where do you think the mistrust stems towards higher education? I know there's a lot of mistrust towards the political realm and sometimes businesses as well, but why higher ed? Why do you think that is?
I think that Gen Z or incoming college freshmen have realized that I no longer have to go to college for 6 and 7 and 5 years to be successful, right? Higher ed needs to look at a way to think outside of the box. And when I say that, what I mean is thinking about how individuals can come to a college campus and get quick upskilling, right? So what does it look like to go and earn a quick credential in 7 to 8 weeks versus a traditional 4 to 5 year plan, right? What does it look like to offer classes at 6 a.m. for your non-traditional adult working student? What does it look like to offer classes on the weekend at a non-traditional start time at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, right? So I would say that, I say all that to say is incoming college students are figuring out that I no longer have to go to school for 5 or 6 years to be successful. And the thing that I always love about the community college system, no matter what state you're in, is that they have the ability to remain agile and offer unique programming. You know what I mean? If industry and community is saying, hey, we need this, community colleges can begin offering that programming the next semester. You know what I mean? I work at a four-year institution. A four-year institution pays the bills for me. I love everything that the four-year has to offer, right? However, there is a special place for community colleges for today's students because they recognize I do not want to go to school for a long time. I want to go to school, earn my credential, and get into the workforce and start making money to provide for me and my family.
That's right. And they don't want to end up graduating with a mountain of debt. I talked to Jeff. Yeah, I talked to Jeff Ebbing a couple of months ago. Jeff Ebbing actually recommended you to come on the show, by the way. So shout out to Jeff. And he told me that students these days are more financially savvy than he's ever seen. So they know the value of a dollar and they know the ROI a community college can bring. So that definitely plays into your favor there.
Can I say one thing as well to that when you said ROI? You know, nobody in higher ed wants to talk about the ranking system that exists in higher ed. However, I think the colleges that are really doing the work are the colleges that are leaning into institutional ranking systems that look at a student's ROI on the education on the time they graduate. So what do I mean from that? Hey, when I started attending this institution, I was making $15 an hour. But when I graduated, I'm now making $30 an hour, $40 an hour. I can now provide food for my family. I was able to buy a house. I was able to get my kid in that school. I was able to buy a car, right? Those are where the real college rankings are at, right? The college rankings that unveil and reveal the mask on the true social and economic mobility that college is playing. So I hear Jeff loud and clear when he talks about the ROI of a college education. He is one of those that says it like it is when it comes to things that need to change in the higher ed.
Since we're on the topic of ROI, let's talk KPIs a little bit here. How do you measure the success of a brand overhaul and what metrics are most important to look at?
You know, I think there are a number of factors, you know, the tangible ones. You see the uptick in enrollment, you see the advancement dollars rolling in. But, you know, I think a good KPI to also look at is, you know, to go back to what I began the conversation with, name recognition. Do people now begin to know who you are, right? Do people now know your institution's name? When we talk about KPIs as well, I do want to talk about the business side of this, right? Oftentimes, people do not like talking about the higher ed side of business, right? But there is some market research that actually has to go into this, right? How do you make sure that your institution is well positioned for not just the student of today and tomorrow, but 5 years, 10 years from now? That is what the bulk of my work is centered on at Colorado State University, is the strategy that goes into future-proofing your institution, right? The Department of Education predicts that there are over 800,000 new STEM jobs that are going to be coming in the pipeline in the next 5 to 6 years, right? How do you make sure that your institution is set up for success, ready to market those programs, ready to begin offering those programs in its portfolio, right? So I think there are a number of things, once again, enrollment, advancement, dollars, right? But I think the future-proofing of the institution is a KPI that we need to begin to track. You know, the institutions that learn to be agile, offer programming and unique modalities are going to be the ones that exist. You know, the brick and mortar institutions, they are great. They serve their purpose for your traditional college student, right? But I think that an institution that hangs its hats on, hey, we have these demonstrative 45-acre buildings and we've got 30 campus, like, you know what I mean? I think a KPI to track is the institutions that are up to date. Some of them, the reality is they will not be here in 40 to 50 years if they do not pivot and adjust to the demand of the student of today and of the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially with the demographic enrollment cliff rolling in and the pool of traditional aged undergrad students dwindling. You said something here with the future proofing and being agile that I think is very important, because I see a lot of headlines on news outlets like Inside Higher Ed or these kind of the Chronicles of Higher Education. You see some of these emails that I get in with those clickbaity subject lines that said such and such college slashed 20 programs or cut the budget by $1.5 million, right? And I'm thinking to myself, good for them for cutting the cost and the programs that that are no longer relevant to their students because they did the market research there. Because they may have cut some budget and may have cut some programs, but it's better than just closing all together, right?
I had an article, Chris, that came out at the top of the year in January. It came out in Community College Daily, which is, for those that don't know, a publication for the American Association of Community Colleges. And essentially, my article was entitled Remaining Relevant. And it essentially talked about the need for college to make sure that they are well positioned. And I wrote this article from a marketing lens. I talked about, how to right size an institution, how to make sure that your brand, continues to resonate with students. But there are some tough conversations and some tough realities that, higher ed leaders have to make today. And once again, I'll just continue to say, the institutions that will be around in the next 30 to 40 years are the institutions that make decisions now. You can even look at some of the institutions in the Northwest, in Minnesota, that are going through, stringent budget cuts, right? I go back to what I said before. I don't want to hit a dead horse, but there is a business side of managing a college and university that I think a lot of people turn a blind eye to. And you need to make sure, higher ed leaders that are out there, make sure that you have your MarCom professionals at the table, because they know they can help take your institution through these new waters that we are navigating.
Absolutely. So Community College Daily, I have not heard of that. I'll definitely have to check it out and maybe even subscribe to a newsletter if they have one to get the scoop from them as well. What are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes institutions should avoid during a brand overhaul?
I think it is doing it alone. I really try to make this sound as simple as possible, really trying to do it alone, right? Trying to do all this work by yourself, right? I think lack of systems. I've seen colleges or universities try to do a website redesign and they just kill the website redesign because it is not, the system, the infrastructure is not in place. Before you even try to do this, I advocate for this at every conference or speaking engagement I go to, but every marketing department needs a project manager to keep a pulse on all the projects, right? Who is helping to move initiatives forward? But the little things, systems, accountability, trust, trying to do it alone, those are the minor pitfalls and if you make those adjustments, because it's hard to take an institution to a brand overhaul if you don't even have a project management system. You know what I mean? It's hard to take a brand institution through a brand overhaul if you outsource all of your marketing to begin with through a local agency. You know what I mean? So I think before anyone even thinks about doing this, you got to have basic systems in place, right? What does it look like when someone across your campus tries to put in a request to have a flyer design, right? There are basic systems that you must have in place before you try to do this, because if you try to get into this work and you're going to waste institutional dollars, which entail our taxpayer dollars, and the amount of people I talk to every day that kill a website redesign is astronomical. And it's because that there is a lot of work and systems that must be in place when you're doing this work. I'm in a website redesign right now at Colorado State University, and you've got to have the right people in the place to do the job.
Give me one piece of advice that you would give a higher ed marketer who's considering starting the process of a brand overhaul. What should they focus on? Give them one piece of advice, one nugget.
Man, the way you eat an elephant is piece by piece, right? You are not going to do everything in one day. After the conference that I spoke at, that we met at, I had so many people come up to me and they're like, hey, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do this. And I said, hey, stop, piece by piece. As you redesign your website, the rebrand and the overhaul happens naturally because you're beginning to wordsmith and copy things. So it's like, hey, are we calling this transportation services or are we calling it commuter services, right? You know what I mean? So stop one piece at a time. And then you can get to the cool stuff, right? Then you can get to this signage and the wayfinding and the picking the mascot and the colors. But you need to start with one thing. And I always think that the digital is the best way to go. Because that is the first thing that people have access to, and then you go from there, you build out from there. But one thing at a time, piece by piece, everything falls into place at a time.
Very good. If somebody wants to get in touch with you to learn more about you or follow you, what's the best way to follow you? What's the best way to reach you?
Man, they can find me on all social media platforms. I'm pretty active on Instagram, but on all social media platforms at The Higher Ed Creative. That is my handle there. You can also find me online at higheredcreative.net. On LinkedIn, my name is Blair Lee. Just the Higher Ed Creative on all platforms. And I'll reach out. And I would love to have these conversations, particularly conversations about how do I bring the brand alive for my institution. That is what I love to do, is come alongside leaders and help tell the story of their institution.
Very good. I'll be sure to tag you in the recap so people can find you easily. Blair, thank you so much for being part of the Education Marketing Leader. Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the show today. If you enjoyed it, don't keep it to yourself. Share with your friends in your network. And if you have a moment, I would really appreciate a review of the podcast. That'll help other people find the show as well. Tune in every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. when I release another episode. Take care now. Have a good one, friends.